In the last video we looked at startup costs versus operating costs. That is, the cost of things that you have to buy before you can even begin running your business versus those costs of things that you have to buy daily or regularly once the business is running. So that was startup versus operating costs. I'm going to look at some other costs today. So another way of classifying the cost of things is whether they are fixed or variable. And what we mean by this is a fixed cost is a cost of something that you have to buy and stays the same no matter how much you produce. So for example, renting a stall in a market, you have to pay the cost whether you sell one product or no products or 100 units on the day that you are at the market. So that cost is fixed, it does not change. On the other hand, variable costs are what we mean when we have costs that change depending on how much of something you make or produce. So an example I often use is baked bean factory. Machinery is a fixed cost. You have to buy the machinery, and whether people stop buying baked beans or whether people choose baked beans every day of the week, you still have to have that machinery. On the other hand, the ingredients that go into the baked beans, the tomatoes, the tin to make the tins, you will buy more of those if you are making more of those. So those costs vary over time. When you're answering a question about this, make sure that you choose something that is very specific, that it is fixed or variable. Try not to choose something that kind of could be seen as a little bit of both. Sometimes, for example, salaries are often seen as fixed because members of staff may be paid whether anything is made or not. But wages are sometimes piece rate, so people are paid more if they produce more. For example, delivery drivers for Deliveroo, and those are then variable, so steer clear of things like that. Big pieces of machinery are useful, and ingredients are good as well. So we've come to our first set of calculations. And the first calculations we have are, we're looking at how do we calculate total costs. Well, what we do is we say they are whatever the fixed costs were plus whatever all the variable costs were put together. And how do we know how much all the variable costs were? Well, we look at what it costs to make 1 unit, and then we times that by how many units we made. So it's a simple calculation, but it's important that you remember this. And then lastly, we're looking at the term direct versus indirect. Direct costs are costs which can be exactly linked to whether there was an output. Similar to, but not exactly the same as variable costs. So in a garage, for example, the motor oil is a direct cost. You only buy in motor oil, and you only have to pay for motor oil if you are going to put motor oil into a customer's car. The same with tyres. You buy a tyre when you are fixing a tyre on a car. It is direct to the job that you are doing. Indirect costs, on the other hand, are the costs that are needed in a company or in a business that do not directly link to individual jobs or units being made. So a good example would be uniforms. You have to buy uniforms but those aren't linked to the cost of making your baked beans directly. Advertising is a very good example. Advertising has to be paid, but it doesn't go directly to an individual item. Two good examples here in the garage. For a garage, motor oil and tyres would be bought and attributed to one job, specific job, so they are direct. Whereas the receptionist needs to be there all the time, but is not chargeable to a specific job that the garage has in that day. Advertising is another very good example. Okay, that's it.